Aisha here. So today's live is going to be really powerful. So we're going to be talking about breaking free from domestic violence. If you are going to be a single mom or if you're already a single mom. And the reason why I wanted to do this topic is because a number of women become single moms through domestic violence. They're leaving an abusive partner, they're leaving an abusive spouse, and what happens is when they end up leaving, they become a single mom, or they may have already been a single mom. They begin dating someone, that person ends up being abusive, and now they are leaving and they're going to be a single mom again. And I thought that this was really important to be able to talk about because some of the nuances of becoming a single mom are a little bit different. You're leaving an abusive partner. You have children that you're explaining this to. So it's not just about you and getting you to safety. It is about also getting your children to safety as well. So Desirae Williams is going to be about how she was able to navigate this. And I really hope that this is going to be
Oh no.
inspirational and very helpful for you all as well
Okay.
as you learn from her. So Desiree, are you
Hello.
here? Hey, I know
Yes.
I
Oh
gotta
wait.
adjust too. It just everything just kind of
Hello.
make sure my head's.
Good morning.
Good
Are you in
morning.
East Coast?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm in
okay,
East
okay.
Coast.
I thought about that this morning. I said, oh wait, it's 10 a.m. my time or her time? I didn't know where you were.
Good thing we're on the same time.
Right.
So that worked out.
Yes, yes.
I'm like adjusting, and I think I just went too low. So while I am adjusting the
Yes.
camera, because when it joined, it like cut my head
Yeah,
off, the top of my head off.
I saw that.
And so now I'm just trying to fix everything, and I'm trying to think about the best way to do that.
It
But
looks good
anyway,
now. You look good now. I can see you.
okay, good. So while I am trying to fix my camera and everything, I just did a quick intro
Yeah.
and just let everybody know why we were doing this topic. And one of the other things that I wanted to share in this is that I actually did a similar topic a couple of years ago. I did a single mom faith summit. And I did that in 2022, and it was, received very good reviews. Like people said that it was very, very helpful. And so one of the topics that I talked about there was dealing with domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that one got a lot of reviews. And then I posted it on on YouTube. So I posted it on my YouTube channel, just a video from that session and
Yeah.
the number of them. But when I posted the domestic violence ones, a number of women were inboxing me. Thank
Wow.
you from sharing it, for
Mhm.
sharing that. And so when I spoke about it the last time, the lady who joined, her topic was very, very, very powerful. It's actually somebody who I know personally and got to witness her going from the situation of getting safe and being able to just
Yeah.
build back up again. And it was very powerful just to be able to watch that. And so I figured, like, what about asking a single mom who went through this? Because my friend who went through this,
Oh.
like,
She,
she's
she
not a
was
single,
married.
doesn't have children,
Oh.
and so I wanted to be able to interview somebody who can also talk to navigating the, um, helping your child be able to navigate this, you getting the safety, but then also helping your child begin to get through this and also help with the steps and everything that it takes to be able to have more than one person
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
navigate to safety. So that is why I really wanted to get you
Yeah.
on and just be able to have that other perspective. And then now the new life as a single mom. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. My son, when I left, my son was 10 months old. So he was still a baby, like 10, 11 months. So I didn't have to necessarily explain things in terms of sitting down. Whereas, like, if someone leaves, with their child and they're a teenager, right? But I will say my experience, right, living in the shelter that we were living in, the DV shelter, I did get to see a lot of women coming in with older kids, with multiple kids, with babies, with newborns. Some were even pregnant. And we had a lot of small groups. So we got to talk about what does that look like to have those conversations. And thankfully, there were counselors and people on staff that would walk some of us through how to have those conversations. I had to start having conversations when my son got older and he started to ask questions like, well, why did this happen? Well, why aren't you and my dad not together? Why do we live here? And then I had to just sit down and explain to him. Now, I'm a therapist by trade. And so me explaining those to him, I'm very just real and raw. Of course, in a way that's age appropriate, of course, in a way that's uplifting. But I just explained to him that, you know, your father and I were not in a healthy relationship. It was abusive in nature. I have forgiven him. We will forgive him, but we will have healthy boundaries with him, because I am a Christian. I am a believer, and I just believe that the Lord is faithful in all that he does in forgiveness, but also having healthy boundaries and letting people know like this is not okay.
Right.
And so my conversations happened later on, but they were really real conversations because 10-year-olds, when they get to that stage, they want to know. They want to know what happened. They ask real questions. So it was a very interesting time, but it happened later on because he was still very much a baby, 10 months, 11 months.
And so, what was the thing how did you decide to leave? And so, what were the things that helped you to be able to get you and your son out of that abusive and toxic relationship?
Yeah, so I just one of the memories that I recall, we were living in this house, and it was me, my son, and my son's father. Now, my dad, I don't even know how he found out, but he found out I was in an abusive relationship. I hadn't told him because I knew my dad was gonna be like, "What in the world?" And I didn't really tell many people because shame, guilt, all the things that come along with that. And I remember one day thinking I wanted to leave, but you also there's parts of you that wants to keep your family together. I only had one child. He only had one child. We were in love when we were younger, all the things. So I really wanted to, in a sense, keep up an image of us staying together. That's really what it is. Now, when I look back years later. But the thing that got me to leave was we were laying in our bed one day, all three of us. And I don't remember what the argument was about, but I remember our son was in between us. He was on the right, I was on the left, and our son was in between us. And something happened, an argument happened, and he hit me. And my son was there, and he was just kind of like, da 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 da. And I remember looking at him in my head and in my heart saying, I cannot raise an abuser. And that's
Mm.
what clicked. It was that moment, even though other times I had thought about it, but it was never strong enough to leave. I think my parents were like, all right, you should go. But it was never strong enough for me to leave for some reason because the love felt stronger than them telling me to leave or a friend or people that knew. But it was in that moment, I knew in the back of my head, I have to start preparing myself to leave because something in me said, you will not raise an abuser, right? And children will model your behavior. I'm sure I didn't think through that then. I mean, I was in my 20s when I had my son. Maybe I had some thought of that. But the thought, of course, now that I'm older, educated, I'm like, children are going to model what they see. But in me and in my heart and mind, I said, I will not raise an abuser. So I knew I had to leave. So it wasn't the next day, but I remember one of the days after that, I went to the park with my son. I'm pushing him. We had a park where you could see where we were living. You could see our from where we are, you can see the park. So I took my son to the park. I'm pushing him, having fun with him. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, how do I leave? I'm thinking through that. Like, what does this look like? And so I called my dad, or I called my dad, and he sent me some information, some resources in my area. He started researching for me, and he said, hey, there's some resources that are available in your area. If you want to use those, I'm always here for you. And that's when I called. I'm sure that day I called the nearby DV shelter, and they said, meet me at Sears. And we left. Yeah.
And so, and I love how you said it didn't happen the next day, right?
Yeah, I
Because
know.
it's a process. And so, what was that preparation process like? Did you have to pack? Did you have to sneak out when he was at work? Like,
Yeah.
what would you tell a lady who's at the point where she said, you know what, need to leave. I need to
Yeah.
get. So how would she go about getting to the point where she can get out of the house into safety?
Yeah. So what happened in my case was I called the hotline or whatever it was, and they have a meeting spot. And they said you have to get a ride to this meeting spot, or however you need to get to this meeting spot. You have to get there. So I called my stepmom and my parents at the time, and I said, hey, they want me to meet at this time. It was dark outside. It felt like a whole thing. But when it was time to leave, of course, I didn't say anything. I think I started packing, and
Mhm.
they came home around the same time I started packing to leave.
Oh,
So yeah, so I ended up having to call the cops. The cops came. It was a whole thing. The night before I left, it was a whole thing where he was trying to get the key, take the key
wha-
from me. But yeah, it was crazy. But I had our bags packed. I think I had one suitcase between the both of us.
mhm.
And the cops came, and he was like, well, she could leave, but you can't take my son. And I was like, I am not leaving here without our son. That is not happening. And so the cops had to like let him know, like we are allowed to leave. And so we left. I got into the car. It was a lot longer than that. The cops were there trying to get his story, my story, what happened, all the things. But I was like, I'm leaving here today, whether you like it or not. Me and this child, our child, we are leaving. Um, so I grabbed our suitcase and I hopped in the car with my stepmom at the time, stepmom, and we got in the car and we left. And that was the most interesting ride to where that she had to drop me off to meet the representative for the shelter. Yeah. So
Wow.
when it's not going to always be a pretty thing. When it's time to leave, when you finally have the strength, the motivation, the boldness, the confidence to finally say enough is enough. Some people are able to leave and they're not there, or you can plan it out where they are away. But for some reason, he ended up coming home as I was leaving, and I thought that was very interesting. But I already had the backpacks. I think he tried to grab the bag, and I was like, I'll leave the bag. Whatever, I don't mind, because I had it made up in my mind that I just can't raise someone who's going to think that this is okay. I didn't even care about my own safety. I mean, I did on some deep level, but it was like, I don't want to raise a child that thinks this is okay. So I had enough in me where I was able to look him square in the face and say, and the cops were there. So there was a sense of safety that I wasn't going to get hurt, or we weren't going to fight again, or things like that. So that was really helpful to have the officers there.
That is really good. And I'm loving how you're taking us through the
Mhm.
process and to let ladies know how there's different types of situations, there are different ways to leave. Because I know with my friend, she tried to leave and there was no one there to help
Mhm.
her. And so he was blocking the door, like he would not let her
Yeah.
leave. And so I love how you said like you had actually called for help. So you had already had a family member
Yeah.
there to be able to help
Yeah.
you leave. You were able to call the police and the police to be able to to be able to help you leave and to go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, in my case, I don't think my family knew at the time he had come
Mhm.
home. They were just there to bring me to the next location where I had to meet. They have you meet at this location that's far away from the shelter. That way, it's safe, because there's other women that live there. You don't want anyone's person, the father, the abuser, whatever. You don't want them to find out where this location is. So my family was just there to transport me. The cops, I think when I called them, I noticed he was there, and I was like, oh shoot. Now, you know what? My memory just actually came back. So the night before, I think I was in my mind saying I had to leave, and I called the cops and they asked him to leave. We had gotten
Mhm.
to a fight. They asked him to leave the apartment. And I said to the cops, I said, I'm scared. He has the key. Can you please get the key? We got the key from him. I got the extra key, but somehow the next day he came back in the house and I couldn't figure out how he got in because I had both keys. But I had already had my backpack ready to go. So he ended up coming back when I was already in transition to say, all right, it's time to go. So it turned into an argument. You're not leaving. And the cops, I had already called the cops. I was like, no, I knew then this was my chance to like this is it. This is not going to work. I can't do this. And so then the cops were there. And then my parents, I guess, saw the cops and was like, okay, there's something happening in the house. They stayed outside. And then once I left, I got into the car and left. Yeah.
So what was it like transitioning into the shelter? How were you able to with your child and begin to get to that place of being able to heal? Because I remember, I don't remember the exact statistics, but I remember a long time ago, like just a long time ago, learning that many of the women who leave their abusers end up going back.
Mm-hmm.
And so how were you able to, number one, get to that place of safety,
Yeah.
and then not fall into the trap of him trying to talk you into coming back and
Yeah. Yeah.
to rebuild your life?
Well, I'll say this though. So although I stayed at the shelter, and I'll say this, when I first walked in, I think my first thought was I looked around, I had my son on my hip, and I remember thinking to myself, this is not my life. Is this really my life? Like that was my head of like, how did I get here? This was not supposed to be my life. And so just looking around, like it's a shelter. It wasn't like a crazy looking shelter, but it's still a shelter. There's bunk beds. It was a lot going on, and there was other women there with other children, and I had just never experienced something like that. So I'm looking around. You have to do your intake and all the things, and I'm just like, what is happening? And so that was very overwhelming for me as a young mom, having a baby with one suitcase in there. But I will say this, in terms of the statistic, there was, a moment where I did think about returning, where we did start talking back, because I had this, now looking back, this idea of a family image, right? I didn't want to be a single mom. I didn't want to, um, have children and have another father. Like I didn't want to have multiple fathers for my children. So we did have conversations where I entertained the idea, but I never went back physically. I just stayed and said, I'm going to work on me. I'm going to, the shelter at the time, they were asking me, what were your goals? At that time I had dropped out of college with my son. I found out I was pregnant. I dropped out. So I never finished. So that was my first thing, where I went in and I said, they asked, well, what are your goals? And I said, you know what? I would love to go back and finish my associate's degree and then continue on to get my bachelor's. So I was very focused of like, all right, I got to build my life back. I dropped out of school, got pregnant, dropped out. I was with this person, very toxic, very unhealthy. But there were moments where I did entertain the idea of going back and talking with them. And, he tried to say, well, I'll be better and all the things. But I think there was something in me that just said, I just couldn't actually do it as much as I wanted to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes, and so how did you get to the point where you were able to transition out of the shelter?
So that was a long process. I know most shelters have like a time period of when, at least in my area, where you can stay for a certain amount of months and they help you try to get an apartment. I actually stayed in the shelter for a while, and then I became one of the candidates that was not, like, they choose different women based off your situation, to actually go to the transitional home. So I stayed there for a few months, whatever that time limit was. I can't recall the time limit, 3 months or something like that. So I stayed there, and then I was able to go to their transitional housing, and I stayed there for a few years. And in that space, I was able to get I finished my associates in the shelter, had a graduation while I was living in not in the shelter, but for the school. But while I was there, I got my bachelor's while I was living in their transitional home, and I started my master's living there as well. I finished my master's having moved out to my first apartment, which was very like new for me. I had never had my own apartment. Um, but I had started my master's program all while in that program. So I started to just thrive. I would think, even in the midst of it, I think sometimes we wait to think there's this separate, I'm gonna thrive later. But I think for me, thriving started in the moment. It started, choosing my friends wisely.
Mhm.
It started going to counseling. Through the program, I was in counseling. I was meeting with when you were part of their transitional home, you had to meet with someone once a month or once a quarter, so that they can see, what are your goals, what are you working on. And so it was a really healing time for me. Still very hard. It was not easy living in a transitional home, where I ended up going back to a college that was nearby. So if my car broke down, I ended up buying a car. I could walk to school so I could finish. I made sure that a lot of the things that I was doing was very local to where I was living in the transitional home, so that when things came up, when hard times came up, I didn't have to quit school again like I did before. So I started thriving even in the midst of living in their programs.
That's really good. And you said something that I think is very powerful. You said you began to choose friends wisely.
Hmm.
And I thought that that was interesting because I remembered seeing something before about healthy dating, red flags and green flags. And so I've seen that, but then you said also
Yes,
friends. So
yes,
I think can you explain a little bit more about this, why healthy
yeah.
friendships are important?
Well, I just knew on some level I needed healthy community, right? I'm a mom with a child, and I have my family, some in New Jersey, New York area, some down south, but I knew I needed friends. And so I went back to college at the time, and I just remember being very intentional with like, I need healthy people around me. I was not thinking about dating at that time. I didn't start thinking about dating until maybe a few years later. Now looking back, 2 years wasn't long enough. But not until 2, 3 years after is when I started saying, oh, maybe I can date. But I was like, I just knew I needed friends. And that could have been like growing up, hearing your parents always tell you, choose your friends wisely. Like those little things start to come back up. So for me, I just was very intentional with that. And I found in college, I met some of the most, that I'm still friends with today, the most amazing God-fearing friends. And I was intentional about that. When I was living in the shelter, I remember seeing this sign. They would have different churches, organizations would host different things either at the shelter or outside of the shelter. So they would bus us to different locations. And I remember seeing a sign. It was about makeup and like coming to this. It was at a church. And I remember seeing it. And it was this beautiful Black woman hanging up on like the announcements door by the kitchen area. And I remember seeing that. And now keep in mind, there were always different signs and announcements, different things to go to at different moments. But this is the one thing that attracted me. And so I went to the church. I signed up, I signed my name, and I went to the church. And I remember walking in the church and saying, oh, I think I'm going to join this church. And they had like, for all these women, they were doing our makeup. Now God knew that the makeup would attract me at the time. Like, I'm like, I love doing makeup. And so I went, but that was like what started to connect me with healthier people, right? Being at that church, being in a community of people that were outside of the church that also were a part of my faith, right? But even in the shelter, we had small groups where we had to meet every month. We had groups. And so I would sit and talk with other women, and I would hear their stories that some of them were going back to some of their unhealthy friendships. And I was just like, no, this can't be me. So I just picked up on different things with other women in the shelter when we would have to share parts of our lives if you were comfortable. And so I was just very intentional with having that. Before I even thought about relationships, people that can speak into my life and remind me like, no, don't go back. No, there's more for you. And I had friends that did that. Like, no, there's more for you there. You're going to be okay. And so I thought that was just very important.
And so I have one
Yeah.
follow-up question, because this is a lot of people don't know what healthy friendships look like.
Mhm.
What are some things that you would share that would help the ladies learn what, or be able to identify what a healthy relationship is and what a healthy relationship isn't
For
for
friendships.
friendships? Yeah.
People that are willing to sacrifice, that are always taking. I think people that are on a healing journey, like intentional, they have very big self-awareness. A lot of the friends that I were, we both attracted to each other, we both had this sense of just self-awareness of um, healing, wanting to do better in life, things of that nature. Also, these friends were people that were go-getters. Like they were people that were going after their dreams and their goals. So they encouraged me to go after mine, and I encouraged them. So I think it's identifying people that aren't trying to be stagnant in life, that aren't trying to that have healthy conversations, that don't mind correction. We would have healthy conversations. It wasn't you know, and there's nothing wrong with if you want to go out, but my friends weren't like, let's go out and let's party, let's do this. If that's what you want, there's nothing wrong with that in on its own, but it becomes unhealthy when that's all you do. Right? We were friends that would meet up and study. We were friends that would meet up and talk about our dreams and our goals. We would meet up and let's pray together. So just friends that were very focused and driven are things that I think were what I was looking for and what they saw in me. So that's kind of how we all attracted to each other.
That's really good. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that
Hmm.
breakdown. And so my next question is that you mentioned some of the things that you realized that you saw women at the shelter who had different age kids. There.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you learned? Because you said that you learned a lot and picked up a lot from the
Yeah.
conversation that you were having. What do you think is important for even women with older kids to know about this process?
Well, I think it's important to do this. One of the things that the shelter program, the center, it's a center now, that they did was they provided like art therapy for children. So and I'm a big believer in counseling if you can. In this case, they provided counseling, but I think it's very helpful to encourage it for your older children. Encourage them to identify their feelings, encourage them to, have real, raw conversation. Sometimes we like to shield our kids from everything. And I'm a mom. I believe there's age appropriate things that you should do. Like you shouldn't tell your 1 year old that's something that you would tell your 10 or 15-year-old about the abuse, right? My son started asking me questions later on. Well, what happened? How did it look? I didn't tell him right away until he got a little older. And then I said, okay, now we can have these conversations. But I took him also to therapy. So I think, what one of the things I saw was making sure they are in environments that are healthy for them. Whether that was sports, a lot of the kids were doing sports. They were doing a lot of things outside of the shelter just to keep things normal for them. And then therapy was something that I saw a lot of the moms do in that program.
That's really good. And so, as you began to really transition out, you said that you really began in that
Mhm.
transitional housing, which is amazing. And I also love something that you said earlier. You didn't wait until you were out of the situation to be able to begin working on your goals, your dreams, and to live life again and to begin to recover. And I think your attitude and your approach to everything and your desire to move forward was very
Yeah,
powerful.
yeah.
And so, how has this experience shaped you in terms of what you will and will not accept? Like, how has shaped your life in terms of your goals, your dreams, your aspirations? And I see now that you are a therapist. So,
Yes.
how,
Right.
I
Yeah.
say this because, you're a believer and I'm a believer too. During difficult times, many of us stand on Romans 8:28, like all
Mhm.
things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his
Yeah.
purpose, right? And when I hear your story, I'm like, oh, that's 828. Like, this is legit it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
maybe I don't want to answer for you,
Yeah.
but that's what I'm
Yeah.
seeing in your story.
Yeah. It's funny. Before our call, I was thinking through this, like just looking at some of the questions and just thinking through life. Like, because this whole thing made me go back, like to look at things. And I was thinking through like sometimes people will say, well, God did this, right? God did this. I don't believe God wanted us to be in an abusive relationship. I don't think God desires that for any of his children. But what he will do is take what the enemy meant for evil and make it work for our good. And so now my story is just working for my good, meaning like I believe that my profession as a therapist was something that God just had for me already. But now this is working for my good, for what he already had for me. Because I look back at some of my journals from when I was a little girl before all of this. I was 8 or 10 or something like that. And I'm looking at my journal and I always had a desire to help people. I always had a desire. I wrote in there, I want to help Black families. I don't know why I was thinking through that at that age. So these things were already here. And then because of my own decisions, because of whatever, I was in an abusive relationship and God just took it to make it work for my good. But in terms of thriving, I believe that you have to find whether you are a believer or not, you have to find what is the thing that's going to get you to say, like, what's your motivation? For me, it was my son. It was One, he did not ask to be here. I brought him here. I had sex outside of marriage. I had sex with someone in an abusive relationship, and he's here and he's mine. And I have to do whatever I can to give him what he deserves because he didn't ask to come to this earth, right? And then my other motivation was that day where I said, I will not raise a man that think this is okay. And so whenever I would come up against any type of challenge, I would be getting up in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, walking to the bus stop to catch the bus, running to drop him off. I would get to the bus terminal because his daycare was by the bus terminal. I found a daycare that was right by the bus terminal so I could make sure I can get to my 8 a.m. class at the community college on time. And I would get there 20 minutes early and wait. As soon as the doors open for daycare, I would run in, drop him off, kiss him goodbye, and sprint to the bus stop so I didn't miss the bus. I've missed it a few times because they happened at the same time. So I always had those motivations of like, he didn't ask to be here, and I'm not going to raise an abuser. I have to give him what he deserves. That, and then also I was still a Christian in some way, even though I wasn't with the Lord. But deep down, I knew some way that the Lord was with me. It didn't make sense. Now it makes sense. But so just finding that, what is your motivation? It might be your children. It doesn't even have to always be your children. It could be you. It could be your own safety. It could be, I deserve better than this. It could be that this is not the life that I want to live. So finding that and identifying that, and when challenges come, not if they come. My challenges still come to this day. Challenges come. When they come, what is your motivation? What is the thing that's going to get you to say, no, I want something better, right? When I was moving into they assigned us rooms when we were moving into the shelter, and I remember walking into this room and I had to like make it our own. He was in a crib, so I would put the crib sheets down, and I remember in my head saying, this can't be my life, as I'm getting the room ready for him, our bedroom. This is going to be our permanent bedroom while we were in the shelter. And I kept saying, this can't be my life. This can't be my life. Those type of things would motivate me to say, no, there has to be more. Yeah.
That's really No, that's super good because I know this is resonating with someone to be able to give them the courage to leave. Because I think one of the things that kind of acts as a barrier and is the fear of what happens after. And I know, like, became a single mom through an unplanned pregnancy. And so I remember when I was pregnant, I was being pressured to have an abortion. And so one of the things that was used against me to try and pressure me to have that abortion was, what your life is going to look like this if you become a single mom. No man is ever going to want you.
Yeah.
Never going to be able to achieve your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm listening to you, I'm like, wait, so many things that an abuser would say were
Yeah.
things that I was told. And so
Wow.
you can have that fear. And when I realized later, like, that was a form of verbal abuse.
Mm.
And what I realized is that, what can lead women to not have their child
Yeah.
is also the fear of what can happen if they
Yeah.
do. But what could lead people to not leave that abusive situation could be the fear of what their life could be like in the
Mhm.
future.
Yeah.
And some women choose what's known or what
Yeah.
they think that they could control or what's familiar
Oh, yeah.
rather than facing that
Mhm.
fear of not knowing what's going to happen,
Yeah.
but being able to trust that the future actually holds something good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
You know, it's so, and you're right. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the familiar. What's so, either way, there's going to be fear. So, like, which fear am I going to choose, right? The fear that's known to me, or the fear of the unknown. By God's grace, I chose the unknown. But I feel like my whole life, we have to, the, the unknown is always there, right? Even if you stay in that situation, the fear of the unknown, we all know that stats say that abuse starts here, but it typically can end in death,
right.
right? That is where it can end. So there is a fear of the unknown, but the unknown could be death. So no matter what you do, what path you take, there's going to be fear of the unknown. And it's just walking it out. And it's not easy. Like I'm saying this, it is not an easy thing. I didn't get up and say, I'm leaving. Like even after I had that moment, I still was internally saying, can I, but you know, I don't, this was the father of my child. Da, da, da. I don't want to leave. I'm afraid. So it's not an easy thing, right? No, it's a lot of women, it's hard to leave, you know. I remember being in the shelter, and the one of the leaders who was over the organization, she looked at me and she said, I've never met someone like you. A lot of women are in your situations and they don't want to, they can't leave, and they have more money than you. I was a broke little girl, but she says they're wealthy and they don't want to leave because of the fear of the unknown. They have to provide for themselves. So it's not an easy thing, you know, and everyone's journey is different. But even with one of the things I wanted to stress with the abortion, like, you know, I didn't have an abortion with my first son, but I did have one after, right? Because I did go back. I did try to make things work. And one of the things that I realized later on in life was I, you know, when I went to get the abortion, the doctor, or not the doctor, the administrator, when you go through the process of that, I remember crying I was sitting in the chair, and you have to go do this consultation before you go to the room. And I remember crying, and I blurted out and I said, I just don't think God would want me to do this.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
And the woman responds to me, and I remember writing about this in my grief class. I did a grief class years later for my master's program, and she wanted us to write about disenfranchised grief.
Oh,
And
wow.
I did my paper, and I was like, what am I going to write on? And I wrote about that. So I used a lot of my social work papers to talk about my journey and my trauma. And I wrote about that. And I remember the professor writing back like, wow. But what happened was I blurted out, God wouldn't want me to do this. And her response now as an adult, well, I was adult then, but an older adult looking back, she said, I don't think God would want you to keep this baby and not be able to provide.
Oh, wow.
And I just, as a young girl, I was 20, 21, but I was still young. I didn't even know what to do with that. So I did go along with the abortion, but I look back and I'm like, I look at our lives and I'm like, God provided along the way. I don't have the mansion. I don't have all the things that I want, but I have provision. I have protection. I have the Lord. And I look back and I'm like, had I believed that God would provide, like I just saw him do it, what would have been one more child? God would have done it. Right. And so I look back and I'm like, you know, we allow fear or people or abusers to say, well, you're going to have this child. It won't work out. You're going to, you know, you're not going to be able to provide. You might not. You might be on food stamps. I was. You might have WIC. I was. You might have all the things. I did all of that, but I still was provided for, and so was my son. I still got my path for me, my purpose for me that God had for me didn't stop because of it,
Wow.
right? And so I don't have this regret now because I've already repented, forgiven, it's all the things. But years before, I'm like, I should have just kept my baby. Like I remember feeling that feeling in the room with this woman, this administrator, whatever. And I even remember going into when they give you the ultrasound, which they weren't even supposed to, but they allowed me. And I remember hearing the heartbeat and just crying, right? Like I want to keep it. I want to run out of here, but I just can't. You know, I'm still. It's with my son's father, so it was just a lot. But God is a provider.
Mhm.
He's a provider. So yes.
I'm so happy you shared that because that's important. And I've met so many women who are considering the abortion because they're with the abuser, because they're looking to get away, and they look at the baby as an obstacle to freedom.
Yeah. No.
And what I'm hearing you is you've looked at your children as your why, your
Mhm.
motivation, your reason for, waking up at 5 in the morning,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
reason for continuing on with your
Yeah.
schooling and
Yeah.
everything to be able to get to this point. And you being in this position and allows you to be able to have empathy and to relate to other people and to be able to help them along their journey,
Yes.
so that baby isn't the problem,
No.
is literally the thing that can motivate you to thrive.
To thrive, to thrive. It's a sense of purpose. You know, children are an inheritance from the Lord. And, you know, God, I believe the Lord wants us to be to follow His way and be married and have all of that. But in cases where that doesn't happen, it doesn't change the value of the child. It doesn't change none of that, right? So, God can do it. God can do it.
God can do it. And I just love that you said God can do
He
it.
can do it.
It reminds me of scripture when it says nothing is impossible with the Lord.
Nothing. Yeah, nothing. I've seen our journey just play out in ways that I'm like, you know, I could have had two children. And that sounds crazy to me now because my son is almost 15. But it would have worked out. Like all things worked out with what I have now. And so that fear of the unknown, right? It can apply to leaving or not leaving,
Mhm.
having the child or not having the child. It's a lot no matter which way you choose, but God can do it. God can do it.
God can do it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I want to ask you before and actually there's two things. Your son is now 15. And so how was it, like you mentioned age appropriate conversations. Can you just share just a little bit in terms of age appropriate conversations, like how things evolved to be able to help him to be
Yeah.
able to understand what happened?
Yeah. So one of the things I did was really important to me was I made sure I was very intentional with healthy relationships after, maybe not romantically, but after. So I had my friendships, very core group of friends. I made sure I had other godly men around him that I knew I can trust. So he has a godfather that he said this to me years ago. He said, and this is before I could even recognize what was going on because I was still trying to, although I was thriving, I was still in survival mode, right? I still had to, I don't even remember everything because I was literally trying to make it out and thrive, right? So I was thriving and surviving at the same time. And so he said to me one day, he said, "Hey, your son is 8, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, or 8 at that time." He said, "But around 10, he's going to want to know these types of questions." I can't remember the questions. He said, "Around this age, especially being a boy, I'm not a man, so I don't know what those things are processed like." He said, "Around this age, he's going to want to know this." Literally after his 10th birthday, not even a day or two after, I promise. He said, "So, Mom, what happened with you and my dad?" And I think I might have said, "Give me a second," because I needed to process that my friend, his godfather, was right, that around this age is literally what happened. He started asking questions. And so what I did was I sat down with him. In some cases, I down with him alone. In some cases, I would invite his godfather in to help him process, because I recognize that men and women process differently. Boys and girls are a little different. And so he would just ask questions like, "Well, why did it not work out?" I do remember sharing with him that the relationship was abusive, and he wanted to know how. What did it look like? What did my dad do? What did it? And that part I didn't share. I didn't start sharing that until much later. I left it as, this was the nature of the relationship. This was not healthy. I've already forgiven your father. He went through his own stage of like, well, I don't forgive him, and I had to let him process that through his, leave that to him, but also let him know, no, no, no. As Christians, we're gonna forgive. We're not going to forget it, and everything's just going to be all grand, but we're going to forgive and recognize that just as much as mommy was broken when I entered this relationship, so was your dad. Just as much as I grew up from my childhood and witnessed different things, your dad did as well. And so I try to give him an overall view
Mhm.
that, some people are raised in abusive homes and then they abuse. Some people aren't raised in abusive homes, but they have some abuse in their bloodline. So there's just different things. So I tried to answer that, but I just wouldn't say everything at once. I waited a couple years, because then I'm sure in a few years when he gets 16, 17, there's going to be other types of deeper questions. And so I'm just very honest and real about my mistakes, his mistakes, and different things like that.
Yeah, that's good. And so what would you want to say to a lady who wants to get free from domestic violence, who um, just is kind of like, I hear this, I hear what Desiree is saying, she's right, and I just want to go. Like, what would you say to
Like
her?
that they want to go, they want
Hmm.
to leave,
They want to leave.
I would look them say that there is hope after this, right? I think we lose hope in the midst of the situation that we're in, and hopelessness just allows us to shrink back. But there is hope when you leave. Yes, there is this fear of the unknown, but there's also this canvas that you get to create. You get to say, you know what, now I get to create the rest of my story. I get to partner with God for the rest of my story. And so there is hope that you can leave. Yes, it will be challenging, but you've been through the hard things already. You've already seen hard things, so you can do it again.
Nice. And then, what type of resources
Hmm.
could you share with the ladies
Yeah.
to be able to navigate this?
So in terms of well, I guess in my state, finding or wherever you live, finding the domestic violence shelter, each county, most counties have them. And I know where I am, they have a center. So you don't even have to go to the shelter to live there anymore. Like before it was just a shelter. You had to come through the shelter and then they'll give you the resources. But now they have a center. So find the local DV shelter in your or center where they have resources where you can get therapy, you can get clothes. I now, which I love, when I was living there, they had donation day, and what I started to notice even at that time was I noticed that whenever donations would come in, it was never for the tall girl like me or for boys. And so I said, or a little, my size. So I said, when it's my turn to give, I would say this, when it's my turn to give back, I'm going to donate. So now I donate boys' clothes and my clothes to the shelter. So they have things where you can pick up clothes. They even, have community resources where they have a barbecue almost every year, once a year. So getting connected to other women that have left like you want to leave is very important, and staying connected. So finding the local shelter, using the hotline, this DV hotline, I don't have it off my hand right now, but calling that hotline, getting information for what is near you, and then also connecting to your local churches or connecting to your local organizations. That way you have people outside of your abusive partner, because sometimes what they do is they isolate you, they make you feel alone, they disconnect you from your family. Get connected to healthy community, whether that's through a church or an organization that is nearby.
That's really good. And as you were talking, I just remember one
Hmm.
question. Um, One of the things that I've heard is that statistics say that when a lady leaves a domestic violence relationship, that's the most dangerous time.
Yeah.
So, how long did it take you to feel safe again, and how were you able to protect yourself in that process?
Well, I would say safe, that probably came years later because, I still had to engage with them, like go to court and different things like that. So even like when I went to go apply for like food stamps and all the different, welfare things, they have it where you can apply where they don't reach out to the partner because they don't want to trigger anything. So now you're afraid. So there was different things in place where I could encounter him less. But in terms of safety, I felt safe in the sense that he wasn't around, but I didn't feel safe in my own body, right?
Mhm.
So I did weird things like even when I lived in my first apartment, I would put shoes outside of my door thinking like if someone sees there's a man here, they won't bother me. So I think my safety was very psychological. Like I just felt unsafe within my own body. So that took a while. That took therapy. That took spending time with God. But safe in terms of him, it took a few years because I wasn't sure, when I had to have conversations about what does it look like for him to be in my son's life. So that's a hard question to ask. That was like an overtime thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you may not feel safe. You won't feel safe right away. But keep pursuing safety, keep pursuing it. I kept every day going to the counselors in the shelter. I kept pursuing it. But it is something that I think happens over time. And there are some drastic situations where um, you won't feel safe for a long time. We had living at the shelter, we had many scares, not many, we had a couple of scares where people if someone came to the shelter, someone I remember, we became friends living in the shelter, where her partner appeared at the shelter. We don't know how he found it. We don't know if he followed her, if he had a tracker on her, but we know that the door, they have security, they had cameras, but someone knocked on the door and we found out it was her, the man, her husband. And so she didn't feel safe for a very long time. I didn't have that experience where he came to the shelter. He didn't know where I was. He had no idea where I was. So it can vary for different people for different situations. She was married to this person. So yeah, it can be scary.
Yeah, I thank you for just coming
Yes.
here, and I really appreciate you just, being so transparent and being open about your journey, because I think it's important to be able to have these conversations and to let these ladies know that there is hope.
Mhm.
They don't have to stay in this situation. They can leave, and it's possible to thrive
Yeah.
financially, spiritually, emotionally,
Yes.
mentally.
Yeah.
There is better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think it's important too, like, there is better. And and I said this earlier, people might look at me now and say, oh, she has her master's, she's a therapist, she's in ministry, she's doing this. But I was on food stamps. I was getting the cash assistance. Like, so when I left, it wasn't like an easy road. It got easier. I stayed focused, right? I was determined. I was the one who I got a real estate license. I got the home health aid license, any type of license they was giving me so I could work. They said, you will pay for the health welfare, said we'll pay for you to get a home health license. I signed up. So like, I was just someone who was like, all right, what do I have to do? I was learning how to make beds like the right way in the hospital. I was a housekeeper. I was all the things you could think of before this. But it's just being determined to say, I want better. I deserve better. This thing is not going to work out. It's okay. I want better. Is there hope for relationships after? There can be. Just continue to heal within. Continue to do what you have to do. So it's not, it looks nice now. Sometimes people might look, but it wasn't always pretty. And that's okay. Even that unpretty season, that unpretty moment turns into beauty as you keep doing it.
Yes, and that is key. That is key, because one of the other statistics I learned is that women who are in a domestic violence situation are more likely to enter into another one
Yes.
with a different
Yes.
person. And so that key to be able to heal
Heal.
and to be able to focus on you and to not want to, because the whole loneliness
Yes.
thing, no man will ever want you. Oh, well, he does. And then you end up in the same
Yeah.
situation with somebody different.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that healing process, that focusing on your goals,
Hmm.
allowing yourself to be in healthy community and wanting and keeping those goals in front of you
Forefront. Yeah. Forefront.
is going to be the thing that allows you to be able to heal, thrive, become your focus, start working on accomplishing the things that the Lord has for you, which then puts you in a different position where if somebody comes to you, you're
Yeah.
like, not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
focused. And yeah.
One of the things I tell my clients now, and I don't work with necessarily DV clients, but just people in general, that now that if they're new to therapy, now that you've been through therapy, I went through it years ago when I was in grad school. And I mean, I cried every session. I didn't know I had so much stuff to cry about. But I tell them, now that you've been through therapy, now that your awareness has increased, you will be able to see someone unhealthy from a mile away. A mile away. You're like, whoa, red flag. Like, that is not healthy. But when we enter into these relationships right after, we're so familiar with unhealthy habits and unhealthy and toxic behaviors that it's comforting for us, right? That new abusive relationship is comforting because this is familiar. You want to get unfamiliar with your toxic things. You want to get unfamiliar with the toxic behaviors from men or from women. And once you do that and you start to unravel that and heal, really heal, not just from the abuse, even from childhood, because there could be things that allowed you to get into this abusive relationship too, whether it could be both or not. But heal, like, spend time healing and just loving on yourself, and when it's time, it will happen. if it's supposed to happen.
Right. So thank you so much for joining us. And can you please tell the ladies where to find you? Where
Yeah.
to contact?
So my Instagram is Desirae M. Williams. I'm working on my website right now for some things I'm doing. It's not done, but it will be DesireeMWilliams.com. And then once you find my Instagram page, you can see like my conferences and my women's ministry all through there on my bio.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. I definitely appreciate you. And
absolutely.
ladies, if you want to connect with me, my name is Aisha Taylor, and I do have a book called Navigating the Impossible, a survival guide for single moms and pregnancy through the first year of motherhood.
I love
And as you
it.
see, it's huge. Because, and that's available on Amazon. And the reason why it's so big is just because when I experienced that unplanned pregnancy, one of the things I thought about was what can I share with ladies to let them know how they can move
Mhm.
forward and thrive and get back up again so that way they
Yeah.
have hope. And so I put it in so much detail,
Yes.
so spiritual support, financial, so that way you have an amazing resource to help you move forward.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Hey.
Yeah.
So thank you everybody
Thank
for
you.
joining, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.